Every year, police executives and police commanders attend some of the finest executive development programs in the profession. The FBI National Academy, command colleges, executive leadership institutes, state leadership academies, university executive programs. And I hope they do. I genuinely believe every police executive and police commander should continue learning. The profession deserves leaders who never stop being students. Those programs expose leaders to new research, new relationships, new perspectives, new ways of thinking. I've never questioned their value. But after 25 years in policing, I've come to believe we're asking the wrong question. The question isn't, how was the academy? Or what did you learn? The better question is, what changed when you came back? Because executive education isn't the finish line. It's the starting point. That's where police praxis begins asking different questions. Not did you attend, but what became different because you attended? Did your instructors begin teaching differently? Did your supervisors begin coaching differently? Did your command staff begin asking different questions? Become more intellectually curious? The officers, did they experience something different? Did the organization actually become stronger? Because if the answer is no, then we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Did we develop an executive or did we develop the organization? Those are not the same thing. One of the greatest lessons I learned over 25 years wasn't about policing itself. It was about organizations. Organizations don't usually fail because people wake up intending to do a poor job. Most people in policing genuinely care. They care about officers. They care about the community, care about doing the right thing. But caring alone doesn't improve organizations. Organizations struggle because good ideas compete with everyday realities. Staffing shortages, budget limitations, competing priorities, operational demands, even political pressure. Constantly responding to today's emergency instead of improving tomorrow's system. Those realities are part of policing. Every executive and commander listening knows exactly what I'm talking about. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. Organizations become very good at maintaining themselves, but maintaining an organization and improving an organization are two completely different responsibilities. That's why executive education alone is never enough, because inspiration has a very short shelf life if it isn't followed by implementation. A notebook full of ideas doesn't change an academy. A graduation certificate doesn't change an organization. Even a remarkable leadership experience doesn't automatically change how police recruits or in-service police officers are prepared. People change organizations. More importantly, organizations have to be willing to change themselves. That's the challenge, not finding good ideas. Policing has never suffered from a shortage of good ideas. The challenge is turning those ideas into everyday practice, and that takes something more than inspiration. It takes follow-through. It takes commitment. It takes asking difficult questions after the conference is over. Questions like, what one thing should look different because we learned something new? Who owns that change? Who has both the authority and the credibility to help make it happen? What obstacle is most likely to prevent it? How will we know 6 months from now that anything actually changed? Those are executive questions, not because they're complicated, because they're practical. Here's something else I've learned. One committed leader can introduce an idea, but one committed leader rarely changes an organization alone. Real organizational improvement requires instructors, supervisors, command staff, training personnel, subject matter experts, and executives moving in the same direction. That's where implementation begins, not with the speech, not with the policy memo, not with the graduation photograph, with people working together toward the same purpose. I also think we need to rethink how we view police education itself. Too often, we treat education as an event. The academy, annual in-service, a specialized course, a leadership institute. Then we move on. But education isn't an event. It's a continuous process. Every instructor teaches something. Every supervisor teaches something. Every field training officer teaches something. Every after-action review teaches something. Every silence teaches something. The question is, what is the organization teaching every single day? Because whether we realize it or not, organizations are constantly educating their people. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. And that's why implementation matters so much. Because if executive education changes the executive, but doesn't change the organization's approach to learning, the organization eventually returns to exactly where it was before. Not because the education lacked value, but because no system existed to carry that learning forward. That's the conversation I believe policing needs to have. Not whether executive education is worthwhile. I think it absolutely is. The harder question is, how do we make sure the organization learns alongside the executive? Because that's where the real work begins. The next question is, what do you do when you come home? Because that is where executive education either becomes organizational improvement or becomes another certificate on the wall. If I were sitting across the table from a chief, a sheriff, an academy commander, or an executive director responsible for police education, I'd suggest beginning with 5 questions, not 50, 5. First, what is one thing inside our organization that should look different because of what I just learned? Not a complete overhaul. One meaningful improvement. Organizations don't become stronger because they attempt everything. They become stronger because they consistently improve something. Second question, who has the credibility to help make this successful? Not simply the authority. Authority can direct change. Credibility sustains it. If instructors don't believe in it, if supervisors don't understand it, if field training officers don't reinforce it, the organization will eventually return to old habits. Third question, what's standing in the way? Be honest. Is it staffing, time, resources, competing priorities, or is it something less obvious? Are people simply overwhelmed? Because there's a difference between resistance and exhaustion. Leaders who understand that difference build organizations people want to improve. Fourth question, how will you know something actually changed? Not because another policy was written, not because another class was scheduled, not because attendance sheets were completed. How will officers experience something different? Will instructors ask better questions? Will supervisors spend more time coaching than correcting? Will recruits leave the academy with stronger judgment? Will field training become more intentional? If the answer isn't visible, the improvement probably isn't either. And finally, if you left tomorrow, would the improvement continue? Because that's the real test. If progress depends on one person, it isn't organizational learning yet. It's individual effort. The strongest organizations don't depend on one exceptional leader. They create systems where improvement continues after leadership changes. That's how organizations mature. Now, let me shift for a moment, because this conversation isn't only for executives and police commanders. It is for instructors, too. Never underestimate the influence you have. Every lesson you teach, every discussion you encourage, every question you invite shapes how someone will think years later. You may never know which conversation helped an officer avoid a poor decision. You'll probably never receive that phone call. But that doesn't make your influence any less real. Supervisors, you're educators too. Whether that's in a patrol briefing, a report review, a difficult conversation after a call, or simply the example you set every day. Your people are always learning from you. The question is, what are they learning? Officers, never assume your education ended on graduation day. Some of the most capable officers I've ever worked with shared one characteristic. They remained curious. They read, they studied, they asked respectful questions. They wanted to understand, not simply comply. That's not weakness, that's professionalism. And to the families listening, everything we've talked about today ultimately comes back to you. Because organizations influence people. People influence decisions. And decisions affect families. Every improvement in how officers are prepared, every improvement in instruction, every improvement in supervision, every improvement in organizational learning creates another opportunity for someone you love to make a sound decision under extraordinary pressure. No organization can eliminate risk. No leader can promise perfection. But every organization can decide whether learning remains a priority after the conference is over. Now let me speak to one final audience. Civil rights attorneys. You begin your work after an incident. That's the nature of litigation. My perspective has simply led me to ask a different question. What organizational learning occurred before the incident? What opportunities for improvement were recognized? Which ones were implemented? Which ones weren't? Those aren't legal conclusions. They're organizational questions. And organizations are built or weakened one decision at a time. That's why I believe implementation deserves far more attention than inspiration. Executive education introduces possibility. Implementation determines whether that possibility becomes reality. Police organizations don't improve because remarkable people attend remarkable programs. They improve because remarkable people return home committed to improving how their organizations prepare the next generation. That's the challenge. And it's also the opportunity. So the next time you return from executive education, don't begin by asking, what did I learn? Begin by asking, what will be different for the police recruit who walks into our academy next month? What will be different for the officer walking into in-service training next year? What will be different for the field training officer responsible for developing the next generation? How about this? What will be different because we chose to learn? Not just as individuals, but as an organization. Because if those answers are clear, executive education has become organizational improvement. If those answers aren't clear, the work is still ahead of you. After 25 years in policing, one belief has only grown stronger. The future of policing will not be determined by who attends the best leadership programs. It will be determined by which organizations become the best at learning from them. That's the conversation Police Praxis exists to advance, not because learning ends the inquiry, because learning should become the beginning of how organizations think. I'm Tom Loglisci. Thank you for listening to Police Praxis Audio Briefings.